The afternoon sun was slowly descending over the city's main avenue, bathing the tall buildings with a golden light that contrasted with the elongated shadows on the sidewalks. Amid the constant movement of hurried people, Carter remained motionless, sitting on the cold sidewalk in front of the most luxurious cafe on the avenue. His deep, tired brown eyes observed the world that continued without noticing him, as if he were just another element of the urban landscape. His stomach ached with hunger, a constant reminder that he hadn't eaten anything substantial for almost 2 days. If only someone would see me today. Just today, he thought, watching well-dressed passers-by hurrying by, deliberately avoiding his gaze. Carter wasn't an ordinary 10-year-old boy. His brown skin had lost its luster after months of living on the streets, and his black curly hair fell messily over his forehead. The clothes he wore, twice the size of his thin, bony body, were worn and dirty, with stains that wouldn't come out no matter how much he scrubbed them during the rare opportunities he had to use a public faucet. His shoes, found in a trash can behind an expensive store, were tied with improvised shoelaces. His eyes, however, preserved a spark of life, a surprising resilience for someone who had lost everything so young. Maybe I should try another place today. Here nobody ever looks down, he muttered to himself, although he couldn't find the energy to stand up. Hunger had been a constant companion since he lost his parents. With no relatives who could take him in, and after bad experiences in overcrowded shelters, Carter had chosen the streets as his home. He had quickly learned the unwritten rules of urban survival: where to get food that was still edible, where it was safe to sleep, which people to avoid. His small body already carried the hardness of someone who daily faced the indifference of a city too big to notice the absence of a child. With each passing day, he felt his existence becoming more transparent, as if he were slowly disappearing. If only I could get a few coins today. Just enough for bread, he thought, massaging his aching stomach. A long black car with dark windows and a shiny surface smoothly glided to the front of the cafe, immediately capturing Carter's attention. The limousine stopped precisely at the curb, standing out among the other vehicles. The uniformed driver quickly got out to open the rear door, and Carter adjusted slightly in his place to get a better view. These little spectacles of urban life were one of the few distractions he had during the long empty days. Must be someone important, he thought, watching with genuine curiosity, momentarily forgetting his hunger. Preston Whitmore emerged from the vehicle with the characteristic confidence of the powerful. Tall, with a well-maintained athletic physique, he wore an impeccably fitted suit that seemed to have been sewn directly onto his body that morning. His angular face maintained the serious and focused expression of someone whose mind is constantly occupied with important decisions. The grey hair at his temples gave him an aura of unquestionable authority. He quickly consulted his wristwatch and made an impatient gesture toward the interior of the car. "Ellie, let's go. We have your piano lesson in 40 minutes, and we still need to eat something," he said, his deep voice carrying a natural authority. Ellie Whitmore came out soon after, adjusting the strap of her school backpack over her shoulder and holding a small, colorful lunchbox. Unlike her father, her face radiated genuine childlike energy, with bright, curious green eyes examining everything around her. Her brown hair was tied in 2 carefully made braids, swinging as she moved. The impeccable school uniform from one of the most expensive institutions in the city painfully contrasted with Carter's worn clothes. Ellie smiled at her father, holding his hand with confidence. "But Dad, Susan already prepared a snack for me before we left. It's here in my lunchbox," she said, raising the small, colorful container. Preston automatically glanced around, as parents concerned with safety in public environments do. His gaze briefly passed over Carter, but without really seeing him, he was just another indistinct element of the urban landscape. "I know, Ellie, but you know I need to have a coffee before your lesson, and you can choose a sweet for afterwards," he responded, beginning to guide her toward the entrance of the cafe. Ellie allowed herself to be led, but her curious eyes continued exploring the surroundings until they rested on Carter's solitary figure. Unlike the adults who passed by him as if he were invisible, Ellie actually saw him. Their eyes met for a moment, and something in the hungry expression of the boy seemed to deeply touch the girl. She stopped abruptly, making Preston interrupt his steps too. "Dad, look at that boy over there. I think he's hungry. she said, pointing discreetly in Carter's direction. Her voice carried a genuine concern, free from the embarrassment or indifference that adults usually demonstrated. "He looks so sad and lonely," she added, her gaze fixed on Carter with surprising compassion for someone so young. Preston quickly looked to where his daughter was pointing, slightly frowning as he noticed Carter. His expression mixed discomfort and impatience. "Don't point, Ellie." "It's rude," he said automatically, as if reciting a lesson. He tried to resume the path to the cafeteria, but Ellie remained firmly where she was, a determination growing in her gaze. "Come on, Ellie." "We're late," Preston insisted, his voice assuming that tone that didn't admit contestation, the same one he used in important meetings. Ellie looked at the lunchbox in her hands, then at her father, and then again at Carter. Her eyes reflected an internal conflict, but only for a moment. With a sudden decision that surprised even herself, she opened the lunchbox and removed a carefully wrapped sandwich. "Can I give my sandwich to him, Dad? Please?" "Susan made two, and you said you'd buy me a treat later," she argued, her voice soft but determined. Her big eyes pleaded, using that expression she knew was difficult for her father to resist. "The teacher always says we should help those in need," she added strategically. Preston sighed deeply, divided between his tight schedule and the desire not to contradict his daughter. For a moment it seemed he would deny the request, but something in Ellie's look, perhaps the same expression his late wife used to make when she was determined to help someone, made him give in. "All right, Ellie, but let's be quick and I'll go with you," he reluctantly agreed, firmly holding his daughter's hand as they prepared to cross the street together. It was at that moment that Preston's cell phone rang. He looked at the screen and his face hardened when he saw the caller's name. "It's the board. I need to answer, it's urgent," he said, momentarily releasing Ellie's hand to grab the phone. "Wait here, don't move," he firmly instructed before answering the call and stepping away a few paces, turning his back to create a bubble of privacy for his conversation. "Wetmore speaking," he said into the phone, his voice instantly assuming the authoritative tone he reserved for business. Ellie watched her father walk away, absorbed in his important conversation. She looked again at Carter, who continued observing the scene with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. Something in that boy's vulnerability awakened in her an urgency she couldn't fully explain. Without thinking twice, she took advantage of her father's moment of distraction, and with the sandwich firmly secured in her small hands, quickly made her way toward the street. It will only take a minute, she thought, determined to complete her mission of kindness. Preston, noticing Ellie's sudden movement from the corner of his eye, turned abruptly, the phone still pressed against his ear. His eyes widened as he saw his daughter already halfway across the street, quickly moving away. "Ellie, come back here," he shouted, completely forgetting about the important call. The panic in his voice cut through the ambient noise of the busy avenue like a knife. He began moving toward her, dropping the phone to the ground without even noticing. "Ellie, stop right now," he shouted again, his face transformed by the sudden and visceral fear that only a parent can feel. But Ellie was already too focused on her mission to hear her father's shouts. She crossed the street with quick and determined steps, approaching Carter with a genuine smile illuminating her face. Carter, in turn, observed the girl's approach with a mixture of confusion and distrust. Years on the streets had taught him to suspect unexpected gestures. He shrank slightly when she stopped before him, uncertain about what to expect. "Here, this is for you," said Ellie, extending the wrapped sandwich in his direction, her smile widening even more. "Nobody should go hungry," she added with a simplicity and wisdom that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her 8 years. Carter looked at the sandwich and then at Ellie's smiling face, unable to believe what was happening. For a moment he remained completely still, as if fearing that any movement might make the girl change her mind. His eyes, normally defensive and cautious, were now wide with genuine surprise. With hesitant and trembling fingers, he finally reached for the sandwich, almost expecting her to pull it away at the last moment, like a cruel joke. When his fingers touched the package, and Ellie effectively released it into his hands, a shy smile began to form on his face. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice hoarse from disuse, but carrying a gratitude that went far beyond that simple sandwich. Preston continued shouting from across the street, his face a mask of terror at seeing his daughter interacting with a stranger, completely vulnerable in the middle of the busy avenue. "Ellie, you can't cross the street by yourself," he bellowed, his tone leaving no room for discussion. He began crossing the street hurriedly, ignoring the red pedestrian signal, his focus entirely directed at his daughter. Ellie looked over her shoulder, finally noticing her father approaching and the urgency in his voice. With one last smile at Carter, she waved briefly and turned to return. It was in that fleeting moment that fate intervened with cruel indifference. Ellie, still partially distracted by Carter's grateful smile, began crossing back without properly looking at the traffic. A red sports car appeared on the avenue, advancing quickly. The driver, distracted by the cell phone he held against the steering wheel with one hand, looked up too late to see the small figure suddenly appearing in his path. Carter saw the danger first, his eyes widening in absolute horror. "Watch out!" he shouted, but his voice was lost in the noise of the city. A sharp screeching sound cut through the air like a metallic scream when the driver finally spotted Ellie and slammed on the brakes with all his might. Preston, who had started running when he saw the approaching car, felt time slow down as he watched the scene unfold in terrible slow motion. "Ellie!" He screamed with all the strength of his lungs, his body propelling forward in a desperate and futile attempt to reach her in time. His scream joined the sound of tires skidding on the asphalt, creating a terrible symphony of despair. The impact was inevitable. Despite the sudden braking, the car couldn't stop completely in time. Ellie was hit, falling onto the asphalt. A surreal silence seemed to swallow the avenue for an instant, as if the entire world had stopped to process what had just happened. Then, like a wave, the sounds returned. Screams from witnesses, the thud of the car door being opened as the driver got out in a state of shock, and above all, Preston's heart-wrenching scream. "Ellie, my daughter." Preston's scream tore through the air as he ran the last few meters that separated him from his daughter. He knelt beside her, his body shaking uncontrollably. His face, normally composed and controlled, was now completely transformed by the deepest terror a human being can experience. Tears began to flow freely down his cheeks as he examined her, calling her name repeatedly, his voice choked with despair. "Ellie, sweetheart, wake up. Please, wake up." The car driver remained standing a few meters away, his face as pale as paper, trembling hands repeatedly running through his hair in a gesture of absolute despair. "I didn't see her. She appeared out of nowhere. My God, I didn't see her," he babbled incoherently, his words getting lost in the growing chaos. People began to gather around, some with phones in hand calling for help, others paralyzed by shock, unable to offer any real help beyond their presence. Preston, oblivious to everything around him, continued calling for Ellie. His fingers trembled as he brushed away a lock of hair that had fallen over his daughter's pale, motionless face. It was then that the most terrible reality hit him like a physical blow. Ellie wasn't responding. There was no movement in her chest, no breath coming from her now pale lips. The world seemed to collapse around him when understanding hit him with brutal clarity. "My daughter. Someone call an ambulance," he shouted with a voice he barely recognized as his own, filled with primordial despair. "She's not breathing. My God, she's not breathing." Carter observed everything, paralyzed, the sandwich still in his hands while people around began to move frantically. Some were already on their phones, others approached trying to offer help, but most just watched, immobilized by the shock of the tragedy unfolding before their eyes. Time seemed to have lost meaning in that small stretch of asphalt, where a father begged for a miracle, while the world around slowly transformed into a chaos of distant sirens and alarmed voices. Preston, with tears flowing freely down his face, while repeatedly calling his daughter's name with his voice choked by anguish. Carter remained motionless for a moment, the sandwich still firm in his trembling hands, as he tried to process what had just happened. A strange and unsettling sensation began to grow inside him, something he hadn't felt for a long time since he lost his own parents. The urgency to do something, to not just stand by watching a tragedy unfold before his eyes. His heart raced, beating so hard against his ribs that he could almost hear it, while a distant memory emerged from the depths of his mind. She helped me when no one else cared. I can't leave her like this, he thought, a sudden determination replacing the initial shock that had paralyzed him. Carefully, Carter folded the paper that wrapped the sandwich and tucked it into the torn pocket of his jacket, as if that gesture represented a silent promise. His eyes never left the scene in front of him. The rich and powerful man, now reduced to the most basic expression of human helplessness, holding his motionless daughter. The circle of spectators seemed impenetrable, but Carter knew he needed to get through. With a courage he didn't know he possessed, he began to make his way between the adult's legs, using his small stature to slide through the spaces, ignoring the looks of surprise and indignation. I need to get to her. I know I can help. I know I can, he repeated mentally like a mantra, each word fueling his determination as he advanced through the crowd. The car driver remained a few meters away, visibly in a state of shock, alternating between trying to explain the inexplicable and offering help he didn't know how to give. His wide eyes and pale face reflected the horror of the situation as he gesticulated frantically to no one in particular. Some people tried to calm him down, but their words were lost in the growing noise of the crowd that was gathering. A woman on the phone was shouting for an ambulance, describing the location with a trembling voice. "Come quickly, please, it's a child. She's not breathing. We're on the main avenue, in front of the luxury cafe," she repeated, her face contorted by urgency while looking helplessly at Ellie and Preston. Carter finally managed to cross the human barrier, emerging in the small empty space that people had instinctively left around Preston and Ellie, as if the tragedy was contagious. For a brief moment he hesitated, the enormity of what he was about to do weighing on his small shoulders, already so overburdened by life. Preston hadn't noticed him, completely absorbed in his pain, continuously calling for Ellie, begging her to open her eyes, make any movement that indicated life. Carter took a deep breath, gathering all the courage he possessed, and advanced with determined steps. "Don't be afraid. You can do this. You have to do this," he said to himself, the sound of his own mental voice giving him the strength necessary for what would come next. With a surprising determination for someone so young and apparently fragile, Carter approached and shouted with all the strength his lungs allowed, "Sir, I'm going to help you." His voice, normally shy and almost inaudible, now resonated with a conviction that surprised even himself. Preston raised his head, momentarily confused at seeing the street boy approaching with such determination. Before he could react, Carter continued, the words coming out in an urgent torrent. "I can help her. I know what to do. Please let me try." His eyes shone with an intensity that conveyed both urgency and absolute sincerity, his small body leaning forward as if every fiber of his being was concentrated on that crucial moment. Preston looked at the boy with a mixture of desperation and distrust. His eyes, red and swollen from tears, narrowed slightly as he tried to process what was happening. Under normal circumstances, he would never trust a dirty, ragged street child for anything, much less to help his precious daughter in such a critical moment. But these were not normal circumstances, and desperation has a unique way of breaking down social barriers that at other times would seem insurmountable. Even so, his protective instinct initially spoke louder. "Step back, kid." "We've already called an ambulance," he said harshly, his voice breaking on the last word, betraying the fragility behind the attempt to show authority. "They're already on their way." "Don't touch her," he added, as if trying to protect her from yet another unknown danger. Carter, however, did not back down. Something in Ellie's immobility, in the growing paleness of her small face, told him there was no time to lose. With an audacity that would surprise anyone who knew his habitual shyness, he moved even closer, until he was directly in Preston's field of vision. "There's no time," he insisted, his voice firm despite the tremor in his thin body. His brown eyes fixed on Preston's with an intensity that conveyed both urgency and a wisdom beyond his years. "Please, let me try. She needs help now, not in 5 minutes when the ambulance arrives. It might be too late." The words came out with surprising eloquence, as if some greater force spoke through him, giving him an authority that his small, fragile body did not suggest. A tense silence settled between them for a moment that seemed to stretch infinitely. The crowd around seemed to collectively hold their breath, watching the unlikely confrontation between the powerful businessman and the street boy. Preston looked at Ellie's motionless face, then back at Carter, indecision clear in his eyes. Time was running out, and they both knew it. It was then that something in the boy's determined look, a spark of knowledge, a confidence that couldn't be feigned, made Preston hesitate. Desperation is a great leveler, and in that moment, he was willing to accept help from anywhere, even from the small, dirty hands of a boy whom, on any other day, he would have completely ignored. Without waiting for further permission, Carter knelt beside Ellie, his quick and decisive movement surprising everyone around. With gentleness but firmness, he moved Preston's protective arms away. "Please, I need space," he instructed with surprising authority. His small but steady hands carefully positioned Ellie's head, tilting it slightly back to open the airways, exactly as he had seen firefighters do once. The knowledge acquired through careful observation now flowed through him as if he had done this hundreds of times. "She needs air to reach her lungs. I need to check if there's any obstruction," he quickly explained, his fingers checking the girl's mouth with a precision that contrasted with his fragile and unkempt appearance. Preston watched, momentarily paralyzed by surprise, as the street boy positioned his small but firm hands on Ellie's chest in a preparatory gesture. Carter took a deep breath, focusing entirely on the task ahead, mentally blocking out the crowd, the noise, even Preston's intimidating presence beside him. He began chest compressions with a steady and precise rhythm, applying exactly the necessary pressure, neither too much to hurt Ellie's small body, nor too little to be ineffective. 1, 2, 3, 4. He counted mentally, maintaining the regular rhythm as he pressed the girl's chest. Between compressions, he leaned in to gently blow air into her lungs, his hands correctly positioning Ellie's head to maximize effectiveness. The determination on his face was almost palpable, each movement executed with a certainty that seemed impossible for someone so young. The seconds dragged on like hours as Carter continued the resuscitation maneuvers. The crowd around had completely silenced, all eyes fixed on the surreal spectacle of a street boy trying to save the life of the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the city. Preston watched every movement with painful intensity, his hands twisting helplessly as he alternated between looking at Ellie's motionless face and Carter's determined hands working tirelessly. "Please work," he whispered repeatedly, a desperate prayer to any deity that might be listening. "Please bring my daughter back. Please," he continued, tears falling silently as he watched that last fragile hope. "Where did you learn that?" Preston finally asked, his voice low and hoarse from crying, genuinely impressed with the precise technique the boy demonstrated. It was a question born both from the desperate need to fill the agonizing silence and from real surprise at seeing such skill coming from such an unexpected source. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he watched Carter continue the compressions without pause, the boy's face a mask of absolute concentration that did not waver even to respond. "How do you, a street boy, know how to do this so well?" he insisted, almost begging for any conversation that might momentarily distract him from the horror of the situation. Carter did not interrupt his rhythm as he responded, the words coming out choppy between the compressions and the breaths he provided to Ellie. "In the streets you learn to figure things out," he said simply, his focus never leaving the vital task he was performing. After 2 more breaths into Ellie's pale lips, he continued, "I saw firefighters doing this once. I paid attention. There was something deeply moving about the simplicity of that response. The mental image of a homeless boy carefully watching emergency professionals, absorbing knowledge that he now used to save a life. When you have no one to help you, you observe, learn, remember," he added after a few more compressions, his voice carrying a wisdom born from the most basic necessity of survival. The minutes passed with excruciating slowness. Carter's expression began showing signs of fatigue, beads of sweat forming on his forehead as he continued the compressions without diminishing intensity or precision. His thin arms trembled slightly with the continuous effort, but his determination didn't waver. Preston, noticing the superhuman effort the boy was making, felt an unexpected wave of admiration mixed with his despair. "Do you want me to try?" "So you can rest a bit," he offered hesitantly, not really wanting to interrupt what seemed to be Ellie's only chance, but worried that the boy might exhaust himself before help arrived. The distant sounds of sirens began to be heard, promising professional help that seemed to take an eternity to arrive. Carter shook his head negatively, refusing the offer without wasting breath on words. His lips were firmly compressed into a line of absolute concentration. Every fiber of his being focused on the task of pumping life back into Ellie's motionless body. Something inside him knew it was working, that he needed to continue, that he couldn't stop even for a second. After what seemed like an eternity, but in reality was only a few seconds, a miracle happened. Ellie coughed weakly, a small and trembling sound that resonated like thunder in the attentive ears of everyone around. Her chest began to move with shallow but visible breaths, color slowly returning to her pale cheeks. "She's breathing, she's coming back," exclaimed Carter, his face lighting up with an exhausted but radiant smile, without interrupting the now gentler compressions, just to ensure her heart continued beating regularly. Preston couldn't contain the tears that now flowed freely, no longer of despair but of relief and gratitude, so intense they seemed to physically overflow from his being. He watched amazed as Ellie's eyes fluttered slightly before opening, confused and disoriented but undeniably alive. A sob escaped his throat, a sound that carried all the terror of the previous minutes and all the joy of this miraculous moment. "Ellie, my daughter!" he exclaimed, leaning closer, wanting to touch her but hesitant, as if fearing any movement might undo the miracle he had just witnessed. His eyes met Carter's over Ellie's body, a wordless gratitude overflowing from his gaze. The sound of sirens approached rapidly until the ambulance finally stopped at the curb, its flashing lights illuminating the scene in intermittent flashes of red and blue. The paramedics hurriedly descended, carrying equipment and a stretcher. The crowd automatically made way, creating a corridor through which the emergency professionals quickly passed, their serious and focused faces contrasting with the palpable emotion surrounding Preston, Ellie, and Carter. "Step aside, please." "Let us through," commanded the first paramedic, his authoritative voice cutting through the crowd's murmur. Within seconds, they were kneeling beside Ellie, gently moving Carter aside to take control of the situation with professional efficiency. Carter obediently backed away, his limbs trembling with adrenaline and the physical effort of the resuscitation maneuvers. He watched in silence as the paramedics quickly examined Ellie, checking her vital signs, placing an oxygen mask over her face, and preparing her for transport. His small hands, which moments before had literally held the girl's life, were now quiet at his side, occasionally wiping away the sweat that ran down his face. The paramedics began to work, however. They exchanged professional glances that conveyed concern beyond what their words expressed. After a more complete assessment, the lead paramedic turned to Preston, his face assuming that expression that healthcare professionals develop to convey difficult news. Preston approached, his eyes not leaving the paramedic's face, instinctively detecting that there was more information to come, something he didn't want to hear but knew he needed to. "She'll be fine, won't she? She's breathing." The boy helped her. "She opened her eyes," he said, his voice carrying a barely disguised plea, wanting the professional to confirm what he desperately needed to believe. His eyes moved between the paramedic's face and Ellie, who was now being carefully transferred to the stretcher, still unconscious, but visibly breathing under the oxygen mask. "She just needs to go to the hospital for some tests, right? To make sure everything is okay," he asked, the fragile hope in his voice contrasting with the growing fear in his eyes. The paramedic took a deep breath, his expression becoming even more grave. "I'm sorry, sir," he said in a low, deep voice, ensuring that only Preston could hear his next words. "She's suffering from internal bleeding. The signs are there, the extreme paleness, dropping blood pressure, recurring unconsciousness despite restored breathing." He paused, allowing the information to be absorbed before continuing with professional gentleness. "We'll take her to the hospital immediately, but we ask that you say goodbye to the girl. The situation is extremely serious and I fear she has only a few more minutes at most, an hour, in this situation. I'm sorry." The last words were said almost in a whisper, carrying the terrible weight of the truth that needed to be communicated without completely destroying hope. Preston staggered slightly, as if the words were a physical blow. His face, which moments before had lit up with renewed hope, now crumbled again into despair. He looked at Ellie, so small and fragile on the stretcher, and then again at the paramedic, his eyes begging for some miracle, some solution that could alter the terrible verdict he had just heard. There must be something you can do. Anything. Money is no object. The best doctors, the best treatments, anything, he pleaded, his voice breaking under the weight of emotion. Tears began to fall again as he approached the stretcher, leaning down to kiss Ellie's forehead with infinite tenderness before the paramedics finished preparing her for transport. The second paramedic, busy preparing an IV bag, muttered to his colleague in a low voice, but not so low that Carter, who had silently approached, couldn't hear. "We'll need AB negative blood as soon as we arrive. The central hospital is almost an hour away from here with this traffic, and she's losing a lot of blood internally. She won't make it." He moved his head in a gesture of professional concern, continuing to work while talking. Carter, still close enough to hear, felt his heart skip a beat as he registered everything they were saying, trying to find any hope in the paramedics' voices, without success. None of them seemed to believe the girl would remain alive. Preston climbed into the ambulance, his expression a mask of contained despair as he firmly held Ellie's small, motionless hand. All his power, all his wealth and influence seemed completely useless in that crucial moment, unable to buy more time or ensure his daughter's survival. The paramedics were finishing the final preparations to leave, checking equipment and monitors with silent efficiency. It was at that moment, with the ambulance doors about to close, that Preston looked outside and his eyes met Carter's, still standing there, small and seemingly insignificant in his poverty, but somehow monumental in what he had accomplished. Their gazes crossed for a brief moment, a social abyss momentarily overcome by the shared experience of life, death, and the fragile miracle that hovered between them. The ambulance doors finally closed, and the vehicle departed with its siren on, making its way through the congested traffic on the avenue. Carter was left behind, alone again in the middle of the crowd that quickly began to disperse. The tragic spectacle over, everyone returning to their normal lives as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But for Carter, nothing would be normal again. He had experienced something profound. Someone had cared about him. The girl had tried. She was the only one who really seemed to have seen him as a human being. "I need to know what will happen to the girl who has the beautiful heart I need to know," he thought, feeling a connection with the girl. He had to go to the hospital that the paramedics mentioned. This, a clear mission of what he needed to do. It was what his heart was telling him. Central Hospital stood imposingly against the night sky, its illuminated windows like beacons of hope for those seeking healing and comfort. Inside the emergency room waiting area, Preston Whitmore paced back and forth, his footsteps echoing on the polished ceramic floor. His expensive clothes, normally impeccable, were wrinkled and stained, silent witnesses to the accident that had transformed his ordinary day into a nightmare. Every few steps he stopped and looked at the double doors separating the waiting area from the treatment rooms, as if he could, by sheer force of will, extract information about Ellie's condition. His hands trembled slightly as he repeatedly ran his fingers through his hair, an unconscious gesture revealing his growing anguish. "Please, God, don't take my daughter. She's all I have." "I'll do anything, absolutely anything," he murmured, words intended for some higher power that might intervene when all his wealth and power proved useless. Around Preston, the waiting room continued its relentless routine. Family members of other patients waited in various states of concern, some whispering conversations, others absorbed in their phones, all united by the same uncertainty that hung in the air like a dense fog. A nurse occasionally emerged through the double doors, calling names that weren't Ellie's, bringing information to other families while Preston continued his torturous wait. Each time the doors opened, he raised his head with renewed hope, only to feel the weight of disappointment when he realized there was no news for him. The clock on the wall seemed to move with deliberate slowness, as if time itself was conspiring against his sanity. "It's been 2 hours. Why isn't anyone telling me anything? My daughter is in there fighting for her life, and I'm here, completely powerless," he thought, feeling a wave of frustration that threatened to overflow into anger. Outside the hospital, Carter finally arrived after a journey that had tested the limits of his physical endurance. He had hitched a ride on a bus, hiding in the back to avoid being noticed by the driver, and finally completed the rest of the way running through the city streets. His small, malnourished body protested with each step, but the determination in his eyes did not waver. He stopped in front of the imposing entrance of the hospital, feeling tiny and insignificant before the massive structure. Well-dressed people came and went, giving him strange looks or simply ignoring his presence, as was usual. Carter took a deep breath, gathering courage to enter a place where he knew he wouldn't be welcome. "I need to find the girl. I need to know if she'll be all right," he said to himself, taking the first hesitant step toward the automatic doors that opened as if inviting him inside. The hospital reception was a sterile and organized environment, with high counters staffed by busy receptionists and security guards strategically positioned. Carter knew he couldn't simply walk up to the counter and ask about Ellie. His appearance betrayed his condition as a street boy, and he would be thrown out before even opening his mouth. He observed the movement for a few minutes, studying the flow of people, looking for an opportunity. When a large family entered hurriedly, creating momentary confusion, he took advantage to silently slip in with them, keeping himself partially hidden among the adults. His small size and years of experience in going unnoticed were his allies at that crucial moment. "I just need to get to the emergency room." "That's where she must be," he thought, orienting himself by the discreet signs on the walls while moving away from the reception without drawing attention. The hospital corridors formed a bewildering labyrinth, but Carter followed the signs with meticulous attention, always staying close to the walls, avoiding eye contact with staff, pretending to belong to some family when necessary. Each time he spotted a security uniform, his heart raced, but his determination did not diminish. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of dodging and weaving, he found the signs indicating the emergency department. He cautiously approached the waiting area, peering through the entrance before fully entering. His gaze quickly swept the environment until he located Preston, now sitting with his head in his hands, the image of desolation. It's him, her father. "I found him," he whispered to himself, feeling a contradictory mixture of relief at having reached his destination and apprehension about what would come next. Preston raised his head when he felt a presence nearby, expecting to see a doctor finally bringing news. Your eyes, tired and red from crying, widened in shock upon recognizing the small, ragged figure standing hesitantly a few meters away. For a moment you thought you were hallucinating. How could the street boy be there in the hospital? You closed your eyes briefly and opened them again, but Carter remained present, real and undeniable. A confused mixture of emotions crossed your face. Surprise, confusion, and something that could be interpreted as hesitant hope. How did you get here?" Preston asked, his voice hoarse from emotional exhaustion, low enough not to attract unwanted attention from others in the waiting room. "The hospital is miles away from the accident site." Before Carter could respond, the double doors opened and a middle-aged doctor emerged, his impeccably white coat contrasting with the grave expression on his tired face. His eyes scanned the room until finding Preston, who immediately stood up, momentarily forgetting about Carter. The doctor approached with measured steps, carrying the weight of the news he brought like a physical burden on his shoulders. "Mr. Whitmore?" he asked, extending his hand in a formal gesture that seemed out of place given the urgency of the situation. "I'm Dr. Nathaniel, head of the team caring for your daughter. Can we talk?" There was something in his voice that made Preston shudder internally, that carefully modulated tone that doctors develop to convey difficult news without causing immediate panic. "Please tell me how she is." "I need to know," Preston begged, gripping the doctor's hand with unnecessary force, as if he could extract answers through physical contact. Dr. Nathaniel indicated 2 chairs away from the rest of the room, offering a minimum of privacy for the conversation. Preston followed him mechanically, momentarily forgetting about Carter, who remained at a distance carefully observing the interaction. The doctor adjusted his glasses on his nose before beginning to speak, choosing his words with professional care. "Mr. Whitmore, we've managed to stabilize your daughter for now, but she suffered severe internal bleeding due to the impact. Her internal organs were affected, mainly the spleen and liver." He paused, allowing Preston to process the information before continuing with the most difficult part. "We need to perform a blood transfusion immediately to compensate for the loss and be able to operate safely. The problem is that her case is complicated and requires quick action," he explained. his gaze fixed on Preston's pale face, evaluating his reaction to each word. Preston nodded quickly, anxious for solutions, willing to accept any procedure that could save his daughter. His hands intertwined tightly, knuckles white from the pressure they exerted on each other, the only outward sign of the emotional storm consuming him from within. "Do whatever is necessary, doctor. What's the problem? Cost is not an issue. I have premium insurance, and even if I didn't, I can pay for any treatment, any specialist," he said, the words coming out hastily, as if the speed of his agreement could accelerate the healing process. His eyes begged for immediate action, for some guarantee that Ellie would survive this terrible night. "I will spare no resources. Absolutely nothing is more important than saving my daughter." The doctor shook his head slightly, his eyes conveying the understanding that the problem went beyond financial resources. "Money is not the issue here, Mr. Whitmore. Ellie has an extremely rare blood type, AB negative. Unfortunately, we don't have this type in our blood bank, or in any available blood bank, and there isn't time to request it from other hospitals outside the country." His face expressed the professional frustration of someone who has the skills to save a life, but is being prevented by circumstances beyond his control. "We're doing our best to substitute with volume expanders for now, but she will need real blood soon. Without it, we cannot proceed with the surgery necessary to definitively contain the internal bleeding," he explained, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air between them like an unspoken sentence. Preston rose abruptly, a sudden idea illuminating his desperate face. "Use my blood," he exclaimed, already rolling up his shirt sleeve as if ready to begin the donation at that exact moment. "I'm healthy. I never smoke, rarely drink. I can donate as much as needed," he insisted, his tone verging on frantic as he sought an immediate solution. The idea of being able to do something concrete, something physical to help Ellie, brought him momentary relief from the feeling of helplessness that had consumed him since the moment of the accident. His eyes shone with renewed hope as he waited for the doctor's confirmation, certain that he had found the answer to the seemingly unsolvable problem. Dr. Nathaniel's expression softened with compassion as he shook his head again. "Unfortunately, your type is not compatible with hers, Mr. Whitmore. We saw your medical record here at the hospital from when you were previously treated, anticipating this possibility." He sighed deeply before continuing, hating to be the messenger of limitations when desperate parents were seeking miracles. "We need to find a compatible donor in the next few hours, or—" He left the sentence incomplete, but its meaning was crystal clear. It wasn't necessary to verbalize the worst-case scenario. The silence said everything about Ellie's diminishing chances without the necessary blood. "We are contacting other hospitals in the region, but as I said, time is crucial in this situation." The impact of the doctor's words hit Preston like a physical blow. All hope that had arisen moments before instantly evaporated, leaving only the emptiness of absolute despair. His knees weakened under the weight of reality, and he collapsed heavily into the nearest chair, speechless, his mind struggling to process the cruel truth that even with all his resources, he could not provide the one element his daughter desperately needed to survive. A silent sob shook his shoulders as he buried his face in his hands, trying to hide the torrent of emotions that threatened to consume him completely. "I can't lose her. I can't," he murmured, words almost inaudible, muffled by his hands. "First Grace, now Ellie. I wouldn't survive." It was in this moment of absolute despair that a small but clear voice cut through the air, surprising both Preston and the doctor. "Sir, I can save your little girl's life." Carter had silently approached during the conversation, catching every word exchanged between the two adults. He was now standing just a few steps away, his thin and fragile body dramatically contrasting with the fierce determination that emanated from his dark eyes. His voice, although soft, carried a surprising conviction that immediately captured both men's attention. "I heard what the doctor said. I know I can help," he added, taking another hesitant step toward them, his small dirty hands clenched into fists of determination. Preston raised his head quickly, his red eyes meeting Carter's. For a moment he was speechless, surprise momentarily overcoming even his concern for Ellie. "What did you say?" asked the millionaire, incredulous. "I know I can help. My blood is the rare type she needs." His eyes did not waver as he held Preston's gaze, conveying both sincerity and absolute certainty. There was no hesitation in his posture, despite the clear intimidation that the hospital environment and the presence of medical authority should exert on a child in his situation. "I may be negative. I found out when. I lost my parents. When they had an accident, they did tests on me too. After they were gone, I had no one and went to live on the streets." Preston looked from the boy to the doctor, who was observing the scene with a mixture of professional skepticism and curiosity. Sensing the need for explanation, Preston stood up, unconsciously placing a protective hand on Carter's shoulder, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just hours before. "Doctor, this is the boy who saved my daughter on the street. He brought Ellie back when she stopped breathing after the accident," he explained quickly, the words rushing out in his desperation to make the doctor consider the unlikely offer. He was there. He brought her back when no one else could help. There was a barely disguised plea in his voice, asking the doctor to consider all possibilities, no matter how improbable they seemed. Dr. Nathaniel examined Carter with professional eyes, automatically assessing his physical state while considering the extraordinary situation that presented itself. His expression reflected the internal conflict between medical skepticism and the desperate need to find a solution for his patient. "We would need to test him first. We can't trust that the child knows his blood type despite him seeming very smart, but let's test. Although the boy seems too young to me, we can do the test and verify." He said, however, his voice showed that it would be an impossible procedure. After conducting the tests, the doctor went to check the results and returned with a grave expression, tempering the moment of hope with the medical reality that could not be ignored. He placed a hand on Preston's shoulder and guided him even further away from curious ears. "There is a serious problem, Mr. Whitmore," he said in a low voice, his tone reflecting the gravity of the situation. "The boy is very small and clearly malnourished. The amount of blood we need to withdraw to save Ellie would be too dangerous for him." He paused, allowing Preston to absorb the full meaning of his words before continuing. "We could simply be trading one life for another. Under normal conditions, we would never consider a donor in such physical condition, especially a child. Ethically, I cannot recommend this procedure, knowing the risks it poses to him, who is also just a child." Preston felt the world tilt beneath his feet again. Having hope offered only to be confronted with such an impossible moral dilemma was almost crueler than having no hope at all. He ran his hands over his face, trying to process the terrible choice before him. The possibility of saving his daughter at the expense of another innocent child, a boy who had already demonstrated more courage and compassion than many adults he had known his entire life. "Is there really no other way? Couldn't we take just part of the blood needed from him and supplement with substitutes?" he asked, his voice almost pleading, desperately searching for a compromise that didn't exist. There must be some way to save them both. Before the doctor could respond, they noticed Carter's presence, who had approached silently. The boy was standing a few steps away, still with the small band-aid on his arm where the blood sample had been collected. It was evident from his look that he had heard enough of the conversation to fully comprehend the situation. His eyes, much older than his 10-year-old body, conveyed an understanding and acceptance that was both moving and disturbing. "I want to do this," he said with a direct simplicity that cut through all the adult complications and ethical doubts. "She gave me her sandwich when no one else noticed I existed. She saw me as a person." There was a quiet dignity in his words, a certainty that admitted no arguments. The doctor shook his head, his face a mask of professional concern. "But you might not survive the procedure," he warned clearly, feeling the need to ensure the boy fully understood the risks involved. "Your body is already weakened by malnutrition. The amount of blood we would need to withdraw could cause hypovolemic shock, organ failure even." He didn't complete the sentence, but his gaze clearly conveyed the severity of the risk. "You're too young to make such a decision. You cannot fully comprehend what you're offering," he added more softly, the doctor's protective instinct in direct conflict with his desperate need to save his patient. "Some lives are worth the sacrifice," Carter replied, with a maturity that seemed impossible for his 10 years of age. There was no fear in his eyes, only a serene resolution that tugged at the hearts of all who heard him. I spent so much time being invisible, with nobody caring whether I existed or not. She cared. She saw me. He stepped forward, his small figure suddenly seeming larger somehow, filled with a purpose that transcended his fragile body. If my blood can save her, then I will finally have done something that truly matters. Please let me help, he asked, his voice soft but unwavering in its determination. Preston looked at the boy, torn between the chance to save his daughter and the moral weight of accepting such a great sacrifice from a child who had already suffered more than his fair share of hardships. It was an impossible choice, the desperate love for his daughter at war with the conscience that couldn't ignore the risks to Carter. For a paralyzing moment, he couldn't find words, his mind split in a conflict that had no right answer. The doctor remained silent beside him, equally divided between his duty to his patient and the medical ethics he had sworn to uphold. How can I decide, Preston thought, the weight of the decision crushing him like a physical presence. How to choose between two innocent children. Suddenly, the moment of agonizing contemplation was broken by a sharp and insistent sound coming from the hospital speakers. Code Blue in the pediatric unit. Code Blue. The mechanical and emotionless voice contrasted dramatically with the gravity of the announcement. Dr. Nathaniel visibly paled, his eyes meeting Preston's with a grim recognition. Without needing words, both knew what that meant. In the same instant, as confirmation of their worst fears, the doctor's beeper sounded shrilly. He consulted him with quick, tense movements, his face confirming what everyone already suspected. "It's Ellie," he said simply, already turning to run toward the double doors. "Her condition is deteriorating rapidly." The heart monitor in the background began to emit alerts, a sharp and insistent sound that seemed to pierce the air of the waiting room, amplifying the already unbearable tension. Preston felt the blood drain from his face as the full meaning of the situation hit him. Time had run out, and the decision he had tried to postpone now demanded an immediate answer. He looked at Carter, whose eyes reflected a calmness that seemed impossible in the face of the emotional storm surrounding them. The boy nodded slightly, a silent confirmation that his offer remained firm, unwavering even in the face of imminent danger to himself. The doctor remained standing between them, his professional obligations in direct conflict with the urgency of the situation, waiting for a final word that would determine the course of events that would follow. Ellie's life hung by an increasingly thin thread, and now Carter's as well, both depending on the impossible decision that Preston needed to make at that exact moment. "Do the procedure, I beg you." "Doctor, I know you will do your best to save me for helping Ellie, so—" "We need to do this, it's her only chance," said Carter, in a voice he barely recognized as his own. The words, once pronounced, set in motion an irreversible sequence of events. Dr. Nathaniel nodded gravely and immediately began giving instructions to the medical team, which moved with trained efficiency. In seconds, Carter was led to the procedure room while another part of the team rushed to the hospital room where Ellie was fighting for her life. Preston followed alongside the improvised stretcher, his face revealing the torment of the decision he had made. "Am I really allowing a child to risk his life to save another?" he thought, the moral weight of this choice oppressing his chest as he walked quickly beside the small savior of his daughter. The procedure room was prepared with impressive speed. Equipment positioned, monitors turned on, sterilized tubes and needles arranged on metal trays. The nurses moved with silent precision, preparing the system that would create a vital bridge between two children who, until a few hours ago, belonged to completely different worlds. The contrast couldn't be more evident. The millionaire's daughter and the street boy, now linked by the most basic element of life. "It's amazing how fate works in mysterious ways," murmured an older nurse, carefully adjusting the pillow under Carter's head. Preston was briefly moved aside, while the team positioned Carter and connected the monitors that would track his vital signs during the transfusion. The boy, small and fragile on the white sheet, seemed even smaller surrounded by adults and medical equipment. His calmness, however, contrasted dramatically with his vulnerable appearance. There was no fear in his eyes, only serene determination. When the initial preparations were completed, Preston was authorized to approach again. "Are you sure about this?" "You can still change your mind," he said softly, leaning over Carter, and offering one last way out. No one would think less of you. Carter looked directly into Preston's eyes, his gaze surprisingly firm for a child about to face such a risky procedure. On the street, no one notices when we disappear. No one misses us. Your daughter saw me when no one else did, he responded, his voice low but steady. A small smile appeared on his lips, not of joy, but of acceptance. A girl with a heart as good as hers, it's worth the sacrifice. We need good people in the world. Dr. Nathaniel approached, his expression reflecting the urgency of the situation. We'll begin now. We'll be monitoring you constantly, Carter. At the first sign of serious complication, we'll stop the procedure, he assured before turning to Preston. Mr. Whitmore, you'll need to wait in the anteroom from now on. Only authorized medical personnel. Preston felt a tightness in his chest upon realizing he would be separated from Carter. Seized by an impulse, he held the boy's small, rough hand between his own. It was the first time he had really touched Carter, and the sensation sent a wave of emotion through his body. I'll take care of you no matter what happens, he promised, his voice breaking. When all this is over, your life will change. You have my word. He gently squeezed Carter's hand, trying to convey through that touch all the gratitude that words could never express. Carter smiled weakly, an expression that momentarily illuminated his tired face. Take care of her. She's a good girl, he answered simply, his words carrying a surprising weight. People with good hearts are rare, rarer than special blood. His small hand briefly squeezed Preston's before relaxing, an impressive gesture of trust considering his life on the streets. Preston was gently escorted out, casting a final glance at Carter before the doors closed. Through the glass, he watched the team moving around the boy. He saw the exact moment when the needle penetrated Carter's thin arm and blood began to flow through the transparent tubes. It's too much blood for such a small body, he thought, feeling nauseated. How can he be donating to save my daughter? The initial minutes passed with unbearable tension. Her nurse briefly appeared to inform that Ellie was responding well to the transfusion, with improving vital signs. Preston felt momentary relief, quickly replaced by renewed concern as he observed the growing pallor on Carter's face. With each minute, the boy lost more color, his lips turning bluish, his skin acquiring a grayish tone that contrasted with the white sheets. It's too much for him. They need to stop, he muttered to himself, pressing his hands against the glass. He's just a child. Don't let him die for our sake. The moment Preston feared arrived when the monitors connected to Carter triggered alarms. Through the glass, he saw the nurse urgently pointing to one of the monitors. His pressure is dropping drastically. We have to stop. The conflict was visible on the doctor's face as he assessed the critical situation. How can anyone choose which child deserves to live, thought Preston, feeling guilty for putting the doctors in this impossible position. He watched the doctor shake his head. A few more minutes. Ellie still needs more blood. Preston pressed his forehead against the cold glass, witnessing the sacrifice in all its reality. Carter's face was completely colorless, only the slight movement of his chest indicating he was still alive. What have I done? I allowed an innocent child to make the decision to die to save my daughter, he thought, tears flowing freely. What kind of person does that make me? The minutes dragged on like hours as life slowly left Carter's body. Preston remained motionless, hypnotized by the horror of the scene. He, accustomed to controlling everything, now could do nothing but watch a boy he barely knew sacrificing himself for his daughter. Please don't let him die. Save them both, they're just children. If they can live, I'll do everything I can to care for them with all my love, he prayed mentally. A desperate plea. Finally, the doctor made a decisive gesture. We got enough for Ellie. Now we have to stabilize the boy. The team immediately redirected their efforts to Carter, disconnecting the tubes and initiating emergency measures. Bags of fluids were hung, medications injected, oxygen administered. The urgency of their movements conveyed the gravity of the situation. They were in a race against time to save the boy who had given so much of himself. A moment of absolute terror occurred when one of the doctors murmured, "We're losing him." The team worked with renewed intensity, moving quickly around the table. Preston, without thinking twice, entered the procedure room. He approached the table where Carter lay, so small and fragile. Leaning over him, he held his cold hand and whispered in his ear, "Please stay with us. Ellie will want to thank you personally when she wakes up." Tears fell freely as he continued, "You're her hero, Carter, and mine too. Don't leave us now." As if responding to the appeal, the monitors connected to Carter began to show signs of improvement. His blood pressure began to stabilize, his heartbeats acquired a more constant rhythm, oxygen saturation improved. A collective sigh of relief went through the room. "He's responding." "He's a fighter," commented the doctor. "We need to keep him under intensive observation, but the worst is over." The following hours passed in a blur of movements and conversations. Ellie was successfully operated on, and Carter received intensive treatment. At Preston's insistence, they were placed in the same recovery room. It was there, sitting between the two beds, that Preston spent the following hours watching the two sleeping forms. "I will never be the same after this," he thought. "How could I, after witnessing such sacrifice?" The sun was beginning to rise when Ellie finally awoke. Her eyes opened slowly, focusing on her father's face. A small smile formed on her lips. "Daddy," she murmured. "What happened?" Before Preston could answer, a movement in the other bed caught his attention. Carter was also waking up. Preston stood between the two, one hand holding each of theirs. "Welcome back, Carter," he said softly. "Did you manage to save Ellie?" "Did they save me too?" Carter asked in a weak voice. "Yes," Preston replied, unable to control his tears. "You saved my daughter twice today, and the doctors managed to save you. I don't have enough words to thank you and to ask for forgiveness. I almost couldn't lose either of you, I couldn't," said Preston between tears. Ellie turned her head to see who was in the room. "It's the sandwich boy," she said with a smile, immediately recognizing Carter. "Yes," confirmed Preston, looking from Ellie to Carter and back to Ellie. "And now you two are connected forever." He looked at Carter with an expression of deep respect and made a decision that would change all their lives. "Carter, when you're both recovered, I want you to come live with us. If you accept, I would like to adopt you as my son. Ellie has always wanted a brother, and I couldn't imagine anyone more worthy of being part of our family." Carter, weak but alive, felt something awakening inside him that he had almost forgotten. Hope. Not the hope of finding food or shelter for one night, but something he had never dared to dream of. A family. Silent tears escaped from his eyes as the full meaning of Preston's words hit him. A small act of kindness had transformed not just one life, but 3 people who now formed a new family. I would really like that," he managed to say through tears of joy. His voice weak but full of emotion. "Thank you for giving me a home." And there, in that moment, they became a family. Later, Preston formally adopted Carter as his son, who now was completely recovered, just like Ellie. In fact, they became inseparable siblings. It was a future that none of them could have imagined when their paths crossed because of a simple sandwich. If this story moved you, don't forget to comment where you're from. Subscribe to the channel to watch more emotional stories. Leave your like and check out the next one waiting for you on screen. Don't forget to comment, I'll be waiting for you there.